Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery Programming Series for our current exhibition, the 2025 Biennial Juried exhibition. This was juried by Deidre Hamler, Wendy Earle, and Charlotte Gordon. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist, Elisha Frontz. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks everyone, and welcome, Elisha.
Thank you so much, Kat. Hi, everyone. Before I start, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to the Ohio Arts Council and everybody involved in putting together this year's Ohio Biennial exhibition, especially Kat. And thank you so much for your emotional support on this whole presentation. It was necessary. And I really want to thank the three jurors too. I know they had a lot of hard work in front of them. It's been a huge honor for me to be included in this exhibition with so many wonderful Ohio artists. Again, my name is Elisha Frontz, and I am a visual artist and a musician from Dayton, Ohio. And hopefully, there we go. The image that you're currently viewing is a close-up detail photograph of my work entitled The House Always Wins. Although I could probably talk about just this particular piece for 45 minutes, I'm going to give you some background and some context about who I am, where I came from, and why and how I make the work that I do. So, I usually avoid talking about myself and my personal life, but unfortunately, this particular piece of work is super personal, and it touches on so many different aspects of my life that it's really, there's no way that I can't talk about some of the challenging issues that I've had to face within my own life. I come from very humble beginnings. I'm originally from a really small town in West Virginia called Nitro. My mother and her family moved to the United States from Nova Scotia, Canada, when my mom was about 10 years old. And my mom was taught to sew and embroider and knit and crochet, etc., at a very early age by my grandmother, who is the person on the left who is holding me. My mom sewed all of the outfits that you're gonna see in these next couple pictures. My mom was also taught all of these fiber arts applications by my great grandmother, who immigrated from France to Canada as a young kid. And my mom was the one who taught me how to sew and knit and crochet and embroider, etc., 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 when I was young. So let's see. My father's family lived in and around Nitro for several generations, and my dad was a draftsman and a carpenter by trade, but his real passion was music. And he was constantly in bands and performing, and he played all kinds of musical instruments like the saxophone and the bass, drums, keyboard, guitar, and he was self-taught. While I was young, my mom worked several jobs at a time because my dad sort of led a rock and roll kind of lifestyle that involved a lot of substance abuse. And my dad would quit jobs or get fired for not showing up. So my life, my early life especially, was really tumultuous, and I knew a lot of financial insecurity growing up. But I also knew a lot of creativity. From the very start, I identified as a musician and an artist. My mom tells me that even as a toddler, I would go up to strangers and introduce myself as an artist and a piano player. Um, this is the first wedding that I sang at. I think I was about 6 or 7, and I interrupted the professional musicians that were hired to play at the wedding, and I was like, hey guys, it's my turn. And I got up and I belted out an a cappella song, and then I was like, all right guys, you can take over again. And that's the kind of kid that I was. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Um, in this photograph on the left, that's me drawing, which I did a ton of as a kid. And the photograph on the right, the most important part is the blanket that I'm laying under. That blanket was made by my great grandmother. She sewed it for me when I was born. And it was the most precious object of my life as a young kid. It was my security blanket. I took it everywhere, and I loved it until it just died a terrible, diseased death. For those in the know, it was a sunbonnet Sioux quilt. But not too long after these photographs were taken, my mom packed up all of our belongings into the Dodge Colt, and we left West Virginia and my dad, and we moved to Ohio, and we lived with various relatives. So I lived with my grandmother, lived with my aunt, whoever would take us in. I knew a lot of food insecurity, housing insecurity, financial insecurity as a kid. And I'd already learned quite a bit about substance abuse by that time. So I'm telling you all of this because all of these early experiences in my life have formed my ideas and my thoughts about money and wealth, addiction, but also creativity and tradition and heritage. And all of those ideas come together in The House Always Wins, which is the piece that I'm going to be talking about. So let's fast forward a little bit. I graduated high school and I went to college. I'm the first person in my family to get a college degree. So I started off at Sinclair Community College, and I had to work full time as I went. So it took me quite a bit of time to get all the way through to a bachelor's degree. I got an associate's degree at Sinclair in 2000, and then I got married. And then I transferred to the Art Academy of Cincinnati, and that's where I got my Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree in 2004. And so these next few photographs are from my senior exhibition. So I'll start there. Although I worked with several different types of mediums when I was in college, I ended up circling right back to the beginning and working with fiber arts for my senior thesis show. I used a lot of fabric and thread, beads, and found objects, and I created a lot of pieces that juxtaposed really geometric shapes that were really soft with biomorphic shapes that were actually hard to the touch. And this one is one of the only two-dimensional pieces that I created for my senior show, but it's probably the closest to what I actually make today. There we go. I haven't read my senior thesis in about 20 years, so I'm not exactly sure what I was talking about. But when I look at these pictures, it's really clear to me that I was trying to process the fact that I was pregnant with my first child. So in the picture on the left, it might be difficult to tell, but I'm 7.5 months pregnant. So although I had planned on going to grad school, I started working on my magnum opus instead. That was my family, my kids. And this is Penelope, who was born about a month after I graduated from the Art Academy of Cincinnati in 2004. She asked me to put this picture in. I worked a bit as an art instructor at the Dayton Art Institute, which is the local art museum here in Dayton. And I led workshops at the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, where I interned while I was in school there. And Penelope turned out so well that I decided to make a second edition, and this is Truman, who was born in 2007. My husband's career kept him traveling, usually several days a week, all year long. And after I had Truman, like many women with children, I realized that I was going to be paying more for childcare than I would actually be paid for working. So I had to quit teaching art, unfortunately. But I did what all rational people do in that situation. I formed a jazz trio, because that's what you do, right? It was actually a lot easier for me to sing and manage the trio while being a mom than it would have been to devote my time and energy to visual art. And we were a really successful trio. I sang at lots of weddings and like corporate events and all that kind of stuff. Additionally, I took advantage of any opportunities that I could to make visual art, like this mural that I painted at a community garden, and these sets that I designed for the plays that my kids were in, and that's Penelope as Snow White. And I also continued to look for opportunities to learn new processes and new materials. So for instance, I took an encaustic workshop with my current studio mate, Kate Santucci, who is an amazing encaustic artist. You guys should check her out. And of course, a main part of raising my kids was teaching them about music and art. Both my kids are classical pianists, and they're both super amazing. And we've been to art museums and organizations all over the United States. So the next few slides are going to be art that's inspired me along the way. This particular photograph was taken at a sculpture park in St. Louis, Missouri. Unfortunately, I have no other information about this piece. I know it was a gigantic pavilion that was all painted pink. So if you know what this is, please drop it in the chat. I would love to be able to attribute the artist, but I don't have any other information. I love anything made by James Turrell. I'm not going to show you any photographs because I don't want to ruin it for you. It's the experience of walking into that space that's really transformative, and photographs just don't capture it. But I will tell you that if you ever get the opportunity to go and experience something made by James Turrell, take it. It changed the way I thought about what art could be, and it will blow your mind. The nearest one that I know of is at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. So not too far away, go check it out. You won't be sorry. Similarly, this piece is also a light inspired piece. I love so many different aspects of this. It's talking about culture, transcendence, light, and it's got lots of geometry, and it's beautiful. And you get to be involved in an environment that is lovely. I've run into a bit of Lee Bonteque along the way, and I really am enamored with the texture and the composition. As we progress, you'll kind of see that our styles align a bit. This particular one is in the Chazen Museum of Art in Madison, Wisconsin. And this particular exhibition of folded paper works was really inspiring to me. This was at the Dayton Art Institute a while back, and it was amazing. If you can find any of these pieces, you might have to go to Japan. Good luck. Um, Please go see them because they're amazing. Um, so that was my life for like 12 to 13 years. I raised kids, I worked as a professional musician, and I tried to touch base as much as possible with visual arts when I could. And then COVID happened. I lost my job because we didn't have any gigs, and I was forced to kind of pivot. And what I did was I turned the trio's practice space into an art making space, my studio. So the works that I'm gonna show you in the next few slides, I made during the pandemic lockdown and like slightly afterwards. So it was all from 2021 to 2022. During this time, I really reveled in an obsession with the natural world, especially trees. I think I was just trying to find something to celebrate about being alive. And at the time, I was completely concerned about human consumption. So I really limited myself to using mostly recycled materials like paper mache. When I returned to a visual art practice, I found that I was still really interested in a lot of the concepts that I had investigated in college. So, like the juxtaposition between geometric shapes and biomorphic shapes, natural shapes. But I was also really inspired by the idea of new concepts like time and just the temporal nature of living things. And that might have been also inspired by COVID. So I started to investigate not only time, but the narrative aspects of art making. The circle became a really important symbol in my compositions because to me it represents the aspects of time, cycles and continuity and eternity and like the reliable patterns of our everyday lives. I also revisited found objects like in the photograph on the left, there's a piece of bark from a sycamore tree that I found and used as part of the landscape. I also learned new processes and mediums. I taught myself how to paint in watercolor. So that's the picture on the right. As my relationship with nature kind of deepened, it also broadened. I was still really interested in trees, but then I also became really interested in the organisms that live in them or because of trees or in cooperation with them. For instance, when Brood X emerged in 2021, I made these paintings kind of concentrating on them. Cicadas are really cool. I created this series of work about mycelium, which is a fungal network that connects trees and helps them to communicate with each other. So this series is a watercolor series, watercolor painting series. And if you look all the way to the right, you can see a more close-up view. This might be what you would maybe see in a very abstract sense if you were to look at like microscopically at a mycelium network where you have chemical signatures going back and forth between the organisms, and you've got fruiting bodies like the brass tacks that come up, and then everything's connected with this thread-like hyphae to make the mycelium network. So I used threads to connect different things together in this series. And this is where I kind of returned to working with fiber. In researching mycelium, it led me to this particular fungus that grows in Australia, which I think is so beautiful, and it so clearly shows the geometric patterns that are inherent in nature. So I investigated this particular form using a medium that I had never worked with before. This is paper clay on the right. And I was also starting to like really look at geometry and platonic solids and sacred geometry and stuff like that. And that led me to kind of research the interconnected qualities of systems. So I was looking at mycelium and fungus, and I started to become more interested in human cells and then organs, and then ultimately how our whole bodies are interconnected in a giant social network. So part of that was probably COVID, because we were all talking about health related topics, but also I started going through perimenopause, which devotes a little bit of attention to your own body. It's really fun. So I started to develop a series of work very specifically about human bodies, and that series really informed my own basic visual language going forward. So it starts with a watercolor painting, and then I usually collage or make additions on top out of sewing paper, which was originally a nod to how I started art practices all the way back in my childhood. But then I also really feel like it's a feminist statement about recognizing a set of plans and instructions that are very specifically designed for women and their bodies. And then I take that and I use it creatively in my own way. So I'm harvesting a rigid pattern and then transcending it to make an original idea. So all of these pieces have sewing patterns in them that I've used in very different ways. And I started sewing directly into the watercolor paintings at this time as well. Eventually, I made much larger works and started to experiment with sewing pattern in lots of different ways. Like in this one, I burnt holes through the sewing patterns. And in this one, I made little beads out of the sewing patterns, and then I laminated them together to make like a leathery textured disc. In some paintings, I just force the sewing patterns to the background, and I started to layer on top of that some of the other materials and processes that I'd been experimenting with, like with this particular series, the tacks and the string over top. This particular piece called River Bending is kind of a culmination of all of the things that I was investigating during that time period of 2021 to 2022. And you can see all the different elements kind of coming together. I've got the paper mache and the circle and the mycelium structure that's got all the really nice geometry in it. A lot of people think that the hexagonal pattern at the bottom is some kind of chicken wire, but it's actually hand stitched with cotton thread. And then you got the trees coming up at the bottom and the sewing pattern in the background. And this particular piece was kind of an ode to the landscape that surrounds me. This is kind of an Ohio piece, basically. Dayton is where 5 rivers meet, so I've got a lot of like rivers and patchworked farmland and forest, and we also have some Indian mounds here, which I kind of reference in the mounded shape that comes up off of the canvas. So while I was in the process of experimenting with all of these materials, my very best friend, Kelly Crabtree, became obsessed with quilting. And she has become an avid and extremely skilled quilter. She made about 8 or 9 quilts just in that particular time period, which is like more than most people make in an entire lifetime. During this time, we talked a lot about the process of quilting, the mathematics, the design work, the time, the effort, the materials, the money that goes into making a quilt. Kelly even made a quilt for me. It's one of my most treasured possessions, and every time I look at it, I feel loved. Talking to Kelly at this point in time really made me understand the value of quilting as an art form, and I started to seek it out in art institutions. And I found some amazing ones. I found a really interesting quilt exhibit in Toledo. It was called, it was at the Toledo Museum of Art, by the way. It's called Radical Tradition, American Quilts and Social Change. And this exhibition just blew me away because up until then, I really hadn't considered quilting to be a form of radical expression because I really hadn't considered quilting at all. But this exhibition challenged my ideas about quilts and what they can mean and what they can say and what they can be. This particular piece was enormous. It's called A Portrait of a Textile Worker, and as you can see, you have women at the Jukies, and they are basically sweatshop laborers. And that is in and of itself really interesting. But as you get closer to this quilt, you can see that it is made entirely of labels from clothing manufacturers that hire sweatshop labor. And just the depth of that particular conceptual idea changed my mind about what a quilt could be. It was amazing. Here's another one that I thought was really, really interesting. This particular one is made up of 16mm film, like movie film. And I remember thinking how gorgeous it is and how you could make a quilt out of anything. And so that was kind of transformative as well. When I learned that the Philadelphia Museum of Art has like a permanent collection of Gee's Bend quilts, I went to go and view them. And I really appreciate the Gee's Bend quilt, all on their own, just because they're really amazing examples of what you can accomplish with just what you have at hand. And they are gorgeous and beautiful works of art. So this one's by Irene Williams, and I really also loved this one by Annie E. Petway. Anytime, I recommend going to see Gee's Bend quilts whenever you can. They're really amazing, gorgeous pieces of work. All right, so at this time, getting to like 2023, 2024, I was dealing with the tragic death of my other best friend and bandmate, Dave Santucci. So I started to create a series of works that were really influenced by the ideas of time, specifically Einstein's theory of relativity and how it talks about time dilation as you move through the universe and encounter different physical phenomena that alter time. It's not constant. But I was also experiencing a lot of time dilation in an emotional sense because I was dealing with so much grief. So that's what I was creating at this point. And here's another piece that I did at this particular point in my life. And I think it's really interesting that I was talking about time and my pieces were taking a long time because of the really intricate nature and hand processed, handmade portion of my work. It does take a very long time to create. So I feel like time is sort of baked into any of my works. So I'm going to talk to you about what started to happen in my family about this time in my life. The next few slides are going to be process videos of me creating some work, and I'm going to just kind of narrate the story of what was going on in my life and the thought processes behind my art practice at the time. So let's hope that videos work well. All right. So at the same time that I was working on those last few pieces, strange events started to happen in my family. My 80-year-old father-in-law started behaving really out of character. What really got our attention was when he stopped paying the bills. And fairly soon after that, he was diagnosed with dementia caused by Alzheimer's. So my husband stepped in and started taking care of the finances. And that's when it was discovered that my father-in-law had been hiding an extensive gambling addiction. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of my in-laws' life savings were gone. We found boxes upon boxes of lottery tickets hidden all throughout the property. It was an enormous shock to our family. And we had all believed up to that point that my in-laws had plenty of money earmarked for whatever care that they might need as they aged. But that money was all gone when we needed it. And at the time, one of my kids was in college and the other one was a junior in high school. And any plans that we had to help them out or to pass on generational wealth, they were gone. As a mom, my first instinct was to wonder about how this was going to affect my kids, and what I could possibly do to try to fix it. As a realist, I realized that there was no way that I could fix this. So I started thinking about what women typically leave behind to their future generations. And in my family, what women left behind were quilts and other kinds of blankets, right? And I feel like traditionally, women tend to pass on what they make, especially with their own time and their own hands. And that's how I generated the idea to turn the lottery tickets into heirloom quilts. I'd had plenty of experience with sewing, but I'd never made a quilt from start to finish before. I tried when I was young, but I gave up when it got hard or boring. So I'm really, really thankful to Kelly Crabtree. Thank you very, very much for talking to me so much about your process and what it takes to make a quilt. My very first step in the process was to do a lot of research. I knew that quilt patterns have symbolic meaning, and I knew that it was going to be super important for me to understand the language that I was going to be speaking. So I did a lot of research into the basic symbolism of quilt patterns. The House Always Wins is a log cabin style quilt. That particular quilting pattern is set up in quilt squares, and the middle is almost always a red square that symbolizes the hearth. And the entire square symbolizes like security of the home and family and safety and warmth and well-being. And all of those ideas were exactly like the aspects of life in my family that were challenged when we found out about the gambling addiction. So it made sense for me to focus on that particular pattern first. The next step was to do a lot of experimentation with sewing through the lottery tickets themselves. It turns out that in some ways it's a lot easier to make a quilt out of paper, and in some ways it's a lot harder. So I had to work through several different trials to find a process that would give me the result that I wanted. After I settled on a process and I started working on The House Always Wins, that's when I had to confront the actual cost of each lottery ticket that I was handling. The House Always Wins is made out of tickets that cost $30 a piece. And it was devastating to know that the tickets in each quilt square were more than I spent on my family's groceries in a week. The shame and the devastation that I felt in the early stages of like cutting and piecing together the lottery tickets made me want to understand gambling addiction. To the best of my knowledge, I'd never known anyone with a gambling addiction up to this point. And my perception of a gambling addiction was like somebody standing in a casino playing the slot machines over and over again. It never really occurred to me that somebody could become addicted to scratch off lottery tickets. So I didn't know anything about this type of addiction or how my family was going to cope with it. So as I was working on The House Always Wins, I started listening to a bunch of podcasts about gambling addiction. And I sampled lots of them. There are lots out there. Some of them were very helpful, some of them not so much. But what I found actually did help was to share my family's story with other artists and other people who were visiting my studio while I was working. What I was really struck by is how many people, how many families have been affected by gambling addiction, and specifically elderly people with lottery ticket addictions. It's really shocking to me how many people have told me that they have gone through the same situation with their grandmother or their father, or how similar our emotional responses have been. Addiction is really stigmatizing, even for like the family members of addicts. It's very shameful. And most people want to hide it. Nobody wants to talk about it. But I will say it is such a relief to find other people who understand what you've dealt with or what you're going through. And so it was during this process of taking the remnants of my family's tragedy and turning it into something beautiful that I really found out the intense healing properties of art, not just for the artist, but also for the viewers. That's my last video, just so you know. So that was the beginning of this series of quilts that I'm making. The House Always Wins was the first quilt that I made. I'm currently calling the series Cold Comfort Quilts. And as I was making The House Always Wins, a lot of other concepts and ideas percolated to the surface of my mind. Such as like, why does our society allow state-sanctioned gambling when we all know that it creates and sustains addictions that hurt people, especially sick and elderly people? One of the interesting facts that I learned from listening to a podcast about the history of scratch-off lottery tickets that you can listen to anywhere there's podcasts. It's called Scratch and Win. It's very interesting. It's the connection between religion and state-run lotteries. This is a smaller quilt that I made out of lottery tickets, and it's fashioned after a very traditional quilt pattern called the God's Eye, that is supposed to symbolize like the all-seeing, all-knowing nature of God, specifically in the Christian faith. And when I learned about this particular quilting pattern, I felt like it would be a really interesting way to start a dialogue about the connection between money and religion. And then I took that concept one step further. This is a much larger piece of work. It's about 5 feet by 5 feet. And it's a modern version of a God's Eye quilt. This one's made out of lottery tickets that cost $50 a piece. When I was making this particular quilt, I was really considering how in a capitalist society, money can, in a sense, become a religion or become as important as religion. And this is a work in progress. I plan to keep creating these quilts made out of lottery tickets. This one is a really, really large one. The pattern is a double wedding ring quilt. Unfortunately, I have enough lottery tickets to make 50, possibly 100 more quilts. Probably more quilts than I have time to create in my life. But my hope is to be able to share the quilts with as many people as possible and share my family story with as many people as possible. I would like to spark some kind of meaningful dialogue about our society's relationship with lotteries and money and people with addiction, and hopefully leave that as a legacy for my kids. But I've also been working on lots of other things as well. This is a small series of works that I did inspired by cosmology. And this is a very large piece of work. It's about 4 feet by 5 feet. It's a watercolor with sewing pattern, and I've sewn directly through the watercolor paper as well. And this one was inspired by a quote from Kamala Harris during her concession speech. And then this last one is a smaller one. It's an 18 by 24. And I'm starting to embrace a little bit of chaos with my fiber arts. So I feel like I'm growing creatively, and I'm adopting new processes still, and learning about new materials and concepts. But I'm also trying to like maintain some sort of visual and personal integrity. But I'm really excited to press ahead and make so much more art. I feel like I have a really long way to go. So with that, I would like to thank you all so very much for listening. It's been an honor to share my story with everybody. I would be remiss without saying one more thing, though. And I apologize if this seems a little snarky, but I took this right off the back of a lottery ticket. If you have a problem with gambling, you can get help. You don't have to live that way. There's a gambler's helpline, and there's lots of people and places that you can go to get help. Here's the number here, so please play responsibly. And if you want to contact me, I have a website, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I also have a studio that I work in that is open to the public a couple of times a month. It's called Front Street, and it's in Dayton, and you can seek me out. So thank you so much for listening today. That's the end of my speech.
All right, so now we're into the Q&A portion of the hour. We do have a question I'll get to. Folks, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat and I will get to them. So those that are not aware, I want to also share. So the Biennial Juried exhibition at the Ohio Arts Council is for professional artists in Ohio to submit their work, and it is extraordinarily competitive. We had almost 2,000 pieces submitted. And from that 2,000, only 61 were able to make it into the exhibition. So already that's, 3% chance, not much chance. A little bit better than a lottery, but not by much, right? So it's an
Slightly.
extraordinary honor to be selected for the exhibition. Beyond that, there are 3 Jurors' Choice Awards, and then the 3 jurors select one piece to be Best in Show, that is identified as Best in Show. And this piece was actually selected for this year's biennial. So just a really kind of great nexus of things coming together, put the programming together well before those choices were made. And then that wonderful kind of coincidence came to fruition. So those of you that didn't know, while it doesn't make up for the lost funds, it's really, I think, a great kind of reminder of exactly what you said, the power of healing through art. So thank you for that. So,
My pleasure. I'm super honored. Yeah, it blew my mind. I have no words.
yeah, well, the work said it all. So we have a question from Roxanne, who, of course, gives you great accolades at the beginning, and says, your current work is very personal work. It's emotional, especially with the backstory. Their question is, does the specific shapely graphic works that they've experienced carry the same emotional value? Or do you use those as therapeutic landing spots? In other words, those aren't as obvious, so they take on a different role, question mark. And do you plan on them becoming more of an emotional marker, especially with our collaboration? And so this is Roxanne, because evidently you're collaborating with Roxanne.
Yeah, I am. Roxanne and I have a two-person show that's happening in from May to June at Sinclair Community College, where I went to school. And in addition to like her showing her body of work and also me showing mine, we're creating collaborative works together. Um, I think I understand your question. I feel like the work that you're specifically talking about is like the work with the circles and the sewing into the paper. And I feel like that work is coming from within. It is more personal in some respects. I am processing a lot of some conscious kind of ideas that are coming out. Whereas the quilts are more of coming from without. It's the world acting upon me, and I have to integrate it somehow. Um, so, does that answer the question? I don't even know, but I'm not sure where it's going to lead, and that's okay. That's all right. I think that um, if the future is mysterious, that is fine.
It's also important to note that, every single piece of artwork doesn't have to carry the same emotional weight. So I love that that's the question coming, like, how do you navigate that? And are you thinking about that with your other works? That's great. I think you answered it in a great way. So,
Okay, well, that's good.
um, yeah, yeah. And of course, since you're collaborating already, you can talk more about it.
Yeah.
We have a comment from Lena Bjornsson, who is from Norway and is very pleased with your work and is lost for words. Uh, the Astrid Thompson also saying such accolades. So I have some questions. I would love for you to talk about how you protected the time for your art making. How did you navigate that? Did you have times, fallow periods where you put down your artwork, or did you always make sure that you had a practice in some way, shape, or form as you navigated um, your
Motherhood.
trajectory? Yeah,
um, I definitely let things go fallow for um, long periods of time. I think that during, I think that raising children is kind of the antithesis of an art making practice. In that, um, raising children is all about focusing on somebody else and their needs, their expectations, and in an art practice, you're looking in and looking at what you want to put out into the world, rather than somebody else's needs all of the time. I think that it can be a back and forth, but I found it really difficult and challenging to be a mom and be hyper focused on what these small people need, and then pivot to like what I need. That was weird to me. So I did kind of go fallow for long periods of time, but I kept a sketchbook that I returned to over and over again, and I would harvest images from publications, like art publications, and paste them into my sketchbook. Um, and then as my kids got older and they were more and more interested in other activities, I would have to sit in waiting rooms while they were in like martial arts classes or gymnastics classes. And I would use that time to draw or, think. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a challenge to be a mom and an artist at the same time. But my kids are adults now, so they give me plenty of time, which is good. I need it.
absolutely. Uh, Alicia, your work has labor in it, like
Yes.
very clear labor. The continuity of a mark is across all of your pieces. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of repetition in all of your work?
Sure. I feel like repetition is very important in a meditative way. Um, I feel like building upon ideas in that sort of slow pacing, going through a repetitive motion helps to really, no pun intended, well, maybe a pun intended, like really tie in ideas, make sure that the concept really works its way into the piece. And the longer I take making a piece of work, the more satisfied I am at the end, um, usually. And I also feel like um, as I'm working, I'm discovering what it is that I have thought about to originate the image in my mind. I'm uncovering the mystery as I'm making it, and then it's so much easier to talk about in the end. I feel like if I just made something, that took an hour, I may not be able to discuss in depth what it meant. Um, if it takes months, then I might be able to figure it out. I'm a slow processor. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Sherry Bowman is offering a reframing of the idea that you were fallow in the time of motherhood, and
Oh,
that perhaps two of your very best pieces are your children.
yeah,
So,
thanks. That's my mom. Thanks, mom. I know. Penelope and Truman are amazing. Agreed.
so let's delve into a little bit before we run out of time. Um, you have these great inspirations that you're taking, and I can see it in your work, even the folded paper. Um, that kind of repetition in the line work there is really very evident. The shadow play in the works that you saw in the Toledo Museum of Art, I see in that kind of cutout feel, but you are absolutely with your own voice. And so I am curious, how do you recommend to perhaps new to the field, not necessarily young, because some folks come to art later in life, but new to the field, in interpreting inspiration into your own artistic voice? How do you recommend folks proceed?
I think that it's always the best practice to start with what brings you the most joy. Um, Look for things in the world at large that really make you happy. Like you're going to be Marie Kondoing it, right? You're going to be like, do I keep is this bringing me happiness? If not, I'm just going to put this to the side. If it does make me really happy, I'm going to keep it. Um, I think that that's the best way to go for lots of different aspects of life. But with art making, especially if you're new to it, you don't want to burden yourself with a lot of frustration. So keep what makes you happy and keep moving towards that sense of joy and satisfaction. So if it's something like if you're drawing and what really brings you satisfaction at the end is the shading aspect of what you're doing, then really dig into that. Become the artist that really, like you, when you look at the work, you're going to see that the shading is like so beautiful and intricate, you know, like for me, it's line and the design aspect of and the concept. There's lots of different things that I find joy in. So that would be the advice that I would give.
I
Dig
love it.
into what makes you happy.
And honestly, I can't think of a better way to wrap than that because I think that you exemplify that within your work.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
so I am going to thank you again, Elisha, for the generosity of your time and talents. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by Elisha Frontz as a part of our programming for the 2025 Biennial Juried exhibition. Special thank you to our jurors, as well as the other participating artists, the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor, who all support the Ohio Arts Council in this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. And Elisha, we cannot wait to see what you do next.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everybody.
much. Thank you,
Take
Kat.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.